Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Choi Ji-sun, serving as a Deputy Director at the Unification Ministry's press office. I want to say thank you to all of the physicals in the room and also to the virtuals who are joining us live on streaming through the ministry's YouTube page. The 2023 International Dialogue on North Korean Human Rights is the second MOU-hosted international dialogue after the incumbent government has begun to discuss North Korean human rights issues with the international community. Today's dialogue revolves around the theme of the task for the international community in improving human rights in North Korea. The discourse further reflects on the perspectives of the North Korean human rights and democracy with the international community in commemorating the 75th anniversary of Universal Declaration of Human Rights and discuss international perspective and measures addressing the protection of the human rights of North Korean defectors overseas. We're honored to have a group of distinguished guests and eminent panelists. Allow me to introduce them briefly. First of all, we have His Excellency Kim Young-ho, Minister of Unification. Next, we have the Honorable Lee Shin-hwa, Ambassador at Large for International Cooperation on North Korean Human Rights of Republic of Korea. Last but not least, we have the Honorable Lee Jung-hoon, Chair of the North Korean Human Rights Promotion Committee of the Ministry of Unification. As for the panelists in the room, the Honorable Song Sang-yeon, former President of International Criminal Court. Ambassador Colin Crooks from British Embassy to Republic of Korea. Ambassador George Schmidt from German Embassy to Republic of Korea. And I'm sorry to say that one of our panelists, Damon Wilson from the National Endowment for Democracy, is unable to attend due to health issue. We sincerely appreciate your presence, and let's proceed to the opening remarks. I invite, we have one of our panelists here with us, the Honorable Song Sang-yeon, former President of International Criminal Court. We sincerely appreciate your presence, and let's proceed to the opening remarks. I invite His Excellency Unification Minister Kim Young-ho to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him with a warm round of applause.
여러분 반갑습니다.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Kim Young-ho, Minister of Unification. It's an honor to welcome each and every one of you to 2023 International Dialogue on North Korean Human Rights. I extend my sincere gratitude to Professor Lee Jung-hoon, Chairman of the North Korean Human Rights Promotion Committee, Ambassador Lee Shin-hwa, Ambassador of International Cooperation on North Korean Human Rights, for joining us today. I would like to thank Lord Arton of the House of Lords of the United Kingdom, who, though unable to join us in person, has conveyed his congratulations through a video message. I would like to thank our esteemed experts for sharing their invaluable insights. I would like to thank everyone in the audience. All humans are born free and equal in dignity and rights. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The first article states this: human rights are inherent to all human beings as birthrights, as its notion and concept have evolved throughout history to become the essential part of human existence. While the Korean society has made remarkable progress in economic development and democratization, the continued endeavor to safeguard and advance human rights, freedom, and democracy is still ongoing today. Upholding the value of human rights is like the swan's leg underneath the water. To keep up the momentum above water, we must continuously struggle, think, and grow. Reviewing the international community's efforts to date and discussing North Korea's human rights issues of current concern are timely and meaningful. Even today, basic human rights are neglected for many North Koreans who may be unaware of certain inalienable rights from birth. From birth, the dignity and human rights that must be granted, they have no understanding of what these human rights entail. The 2023 report on North Korean human rights revealed
종교 행위 등에 대해
the alarming insistence where the death penalty is still employed for activities such as watching and disseminating South Korean videos, as well as practicing religion. Incidences of assault and ill treatment persist in detention facilities. Furthermore, North Korea's allocation of limited resources towards military endeavors, including nuclear and missile development, deteriorates its vulnerable population, leading to hunger and suffering. The 2014 COI report, The Turning Point in the Epic of North Korean Human Rights, declared widespread, systematic, and gross violation of human rights in North Korea, classifying them as crime against humanity. The report emphasized the international community's duty to protect North Koreans and called for international community's intervention and coordination in human rights issues. I believe that the international community bears the responsibility to stand in solidarity against the North Korean authorities to urge their changes to improve human rights situations for its people in line with established international norms. Facilitating more access to international information for North Koreans is imperative in empowering them to comprehend the extent of human rights abuses they suffer. Simultaneously, efforts must be made to hold perpetrators of human rights violations accountable. In 2023, our government made earnest efforts in raising awareness about the reality of human rights conditions in North Korea. The inaugural public release of the 2023 report on North Korean human rights, active support for civil society's initiative, and the start of the North Korean Human Rights Center projects are our testament to commitment. In the coming year, our resolve remains unwavering as we persist in advancing human rights in North Korea. 2024 marks the 10th anniversary of the COI report and the 20th anniversary of the establishment of the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in North Korea. Leveraging these milestones, we intend to elevate the discourse of North Korean human rights within the international community. The ministry will strengthen our coordination with the international community and civil societies to ensure that the universal periodic review of North Korea will take place. In the upcoming years, our effort will be extended to build onto the report on North Korean human rights that published this year and advance our assistance to civil societies for their endeavor to promote human rights situation in North Korea. Based on our principle to provide humanitarian assistance regardless of political and military circumstances, we'll be ready to provide humanitarian assistance to North Korea, particularly in crisis situations affecting vulnerable populations. In conclusion, we approach the 10th anniversary since the unfortunate incident involving missionary Kim Guk-ki and Choi Chung-gil detainment in North Korea and missionary Kim Jong-uk's detainment that happened over a decade ago. Our government is resolute in pursuing their repatriation and ensuring their status. Despite the long-standing international endeavors, including the North Korean human rights resolutions, human rights violation is still a status quo in North Korea. Yet, our continued request to North Korea in a uniformed manner to urge their change will shape the North to change. Until the day when North Koreans enjoy the same freedoms and human rights as we do, the Ministry of Unification remains committed to international dialogue on human rights in North Korea. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the participants and wish you a warm and joyous New Year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Minister, for your insightful words. Next, there will be a welcoming remark from the chair of the North Korean Human Rights Promotion Committee, Lee Jung-hoon. Please welcome him with a warm round of applause.
여러분 반갑습니다.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lee Jung-hoon from North Korean Human Rights Promotion Committee. I'm also the professor at Yonsei University International Studies. Ministry of Unification following last year has decided to host international dialogue on North Korean human rights following last year. 2 years in a row, it's wonderful to have such timely international forum. I would like to thank Minister Kim Young-ho and all the members of the ministry for their wonderful hospitality. Today, we are going to talk about how the international community could promote North Korean human rights. On November 29th, we had another meeting hosted by the Ministry of Unification about this issue. It was a major international conference, and many suggestions were made, and especially when it comes to North Korean leaflets, and we are going to have a low orbit communication satellite, which is a new technology, and that will be able to promote the spreading of digital information throughout North Korea. Satellite dishes and terminals, we don't need these dishes or terminals. We will be connected directly to smartphones for calls, text messages, and I believe internet connection will be made available sometime in the future. And that gives us a big hope in providing more widespread information throughout North Korea. International dialogue on North Korea human rights. We will be looking for measures to promote the human rights of North Korean people, especially in China. Of course, the South Korean government will look forward to a lot of great ideas about what we can do, and also as a member of the international community. I sincerely hope today's dialogue can give us a lot of insight in the topic. On and offline participants and panelists, I would like to thank everybody for joining us today.
Thank you for your kind words. There will be video congratulatory remarks from His Excellency David Alton, member of the UK's House of Lords.
Last month, the President of the Republic of Korea, President Yoon, came to the Houses of Parliament. And it was a great moment in British-Korean relations. It was also a moment for thinking about the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because every single one of the 30 articles in the UDHR are violated north of the 38th parallel inside North Korea. And it's high time that we called out the atrocities that are committed in the name of the North Korean dictatorship. 10 years ago, Mr. Justice Kirby, the Australian jurist, on behalf of the United Nations, he headed up a commission of inquiry which took evidence here in the British Houses of Parliament and heard about some of the atrocities which he labelled as crimes against humanity, saying this was a state without parallel and it had echoes of the atrocities that have been committed in the Reich. And yet that has never been referred to the International Criminal Court, and nothing has been done to call out North Korea for its violations, egregious acts committed against people, not least refugees who have been returned by the People's Republic of China in violation of the 1951 Refugee Convention to North Korea, where they face execution, imprisonment, torture, any number of reprehensible acts that we know that North Korea has committed in the past and probably is committing now, even as we meet. I met here in Parliament Just 2 weeks ago, a lady who told me about her sister, who at the age of 14 was trafficked from North Korea into China. She was violated, raped, impregnated, and had been there for 25 years, and then repatriated to North Korea by the People's Republic of China. We nations who believe in human rights, who believe in the rule of law, who believe in human dignity, we must speak out more strongly, firmly, and with great conviction about the upholding of the rules-based order. And the time is short. We can see a nexus of nations, including North Korea, Putin's Russia, the PRC, and also Iran, coming together to create an axis of dictatorships. We democracies must stand together and rebuild the architecture that Eleanor Roosevelt and others were part of back in 1948, when they created not just the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but within 24 hours of one another, the Convention on the Crime of Genocide. These have been two wonderful statements of what should be done, but we need to put more flesh on the bones. We need to put the words more into action. And I, therefore, am very glad that the Republic of Korea will be on the Security Council of the United Nations in the year ahead. And I hope that it will use the opportunities it has to uphold and reaffirm and see the renewal of the Universal Declaration, but also to call out those who try to stand against the referral to the ICC of the Commission of Inquiry recommendations led by Mr. Justice Kirby. So there's work ahead, and we mustn't give up on it, which is why we must celebrate the privilege of living in democracies. And next year, there will be a summit on democracy that will be held in the Republic of Korea. And I hope that many democratic nations like this great United Kingdom will get behind it. So I wish you the very best for your endeavors.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And lastly, we have congratulatory remarks from the Ambassador at Large for International Cooperation on North Korean Human Rights of the ROK, Lee Shin-hwa. Please welcome her with a warm round of applause.
김영호 장관님,
Minister Kim Yong-ho, Chief Lee Jong-hun, Professor Song Sang-hyun, former President of International Criminal Court, Professor Larry Diamond, His Excellency Ambassador Colin Crooks, Ambassador Georg Schmidt, and also former Deputy Assistant Secretary Roberta Cohen, Special Envoy Julie Turner, and His Excellency Tamara Mohini. I'd like to welcome you all. I have prepared my speech in English, so I'll be speaking in English from now.
everyone present on and offline today. I'd like to extend my deepest congratulations on the occasion of the 2023 International Dialogue on North Korean Human Rights organized by Ministry of Unification. This event, since its inception last year, has grown in great significance. The previous year's conference shed light on two critical themes: the global perspectives on North Korean human rights issues and interconnectedness of North Korea's military threat and human rights violations, aptly described as the two sides of the same coin. These topics have rightly gained more attention over the past year, leading to a stronger international focus on the long-standing, yet stagnant issues surrounding North Korea. This renewed focus aims to combat the global fatigue phenomena associated with these enduring problems. Moreover, concerted efforts are being undertaken to ensure that North Korean humanitarian situations are not overshadowed or forgotten by other global crises. As North Korean nuclear crisis and military provocation escalate, there is a growing scholarly and policy-driven discourse on the correlations between Kim Jong-un's ambition for perpetual rule and hereditary succession and internal and external strategy of augmenting military adventurism while enforcing tight control and politics of fear on their own people. This year, the dialogue revolves around theme of how international community could promote North Korean human rights and revisiting North Korean human rights and democracy with international community. It also focuses on protection of human rights of overseas North Korean defectors. We are privileged to host distinguished scholars, policymakers, and ambassadors to discuss these critical issues today. The first session delves into the relationship between democracy and human rights, while the second focuses on international collaboration concerning North Korean escapees. The timing of this conference is highly pertinent, especially in light of the upcoming Democracy Summit in Korea next March, as just Senator Artin has mentioned as well, which emphasizes anti-authoritarianism and the human rights promotion. The recent issue of China's large-scale forced repatriation has become a serious global concern, making these topics even more critical. As the Korean ambassador of international cooperation on North Korean human rights, I express my deep gratitude and excitement for the opportunity to engage with top experts in insightful and in-depth discussion on these subjects. Building upon the foundation laid last year, I look forward to the development of innovative, renewed, tangible action plans to enhance human rights of North Korean people. I also hope that this international dialogue continues to expand annually, attracting increasing level of participation and interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Lee, for your inspiring words. Before we begin our first session, we'll have a brief photo opportunity. Participants, please come up to the stage. Okay, before we begin, please allow us a few minutes to arrange to set the stage. And participants, please come up to the stage after the stage is set. All the remarks and discussion will be translated simultaneously into Korean and English. For channel 1, it's Korean, and channel 2 for English. Participants, please come up to the stage for session 1. Okay, now we are ready to go. Ambassador Lee will chair the first session. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. This first session is about what we are thinking about North Korean human rights in terms of the democracy and the role of the international community while we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the UN Declaration on Human Rights. This year is a very special year. This is, as I said, the 75th anniversary of that, and also 30th anniversary of the UN Vienna Convention, and also the 20th anniversary of the EU-led UN resolution on North Korean human rights, and also, as we all know, the 10th anniversary of the establishment of Commission of Inquiry of the North Korean human rights. Unfortunately, however, human rights situation in North Korea shows little sign of improvement, or in many areas, it's even further deteriorated. And also, as I briefly mentioned in my opening remarks, this deterioration can largely be attributed to Kim Jong-un's policy of regime security is have about priority at all cost over than their own people. So the relationship between democracy and North Korean human rights is crucial, as democracy is the foundational principle of freedom, equality, and rule of law, starkly contrast with widespread human rights abuses under North Korea's autocratic regimes. Promoting democracy in North Korea is essential, as it can lead to enhanced respect for human rights, providing a framework for accountability and positive change. Having said that, we have 4 distinguished panelists here today. Since we will miss the President Damon Wilson of National Endowment of Democracy because of his illness, but we have still the 4 top experts on these issues. So I would like to begin with Professor Larry Diamond. I was wondering whether Larry is still on. Okay, actually he's the leading scholar on democracy, but since he hasn't yet been connected online, allow me to start with Judge Song Sang-hyun, who is the second president of the International Criminal Court, the professor of law at Seoul National. He was a professor of law at Seoul National University for more than 30 years. Although he's not going to talk directly about the relation between democracy and human rights, I would like to tell you that drawing on his 12-year tenure as the second president of the International Criminal Court, Judge Song will discuss how the International Criminal Court can halt or prevent horrific human rights abuses of the North Korean regime. And he will probably he will talk about the alternative to bring the North Korean leader to justice before the ICC, considering the limitation of the Rome Statute and the potential of a Security Council referral, as seen in the precedent case of Sudan and Libya. So since we have one panelist out now, so maybe you have 10 to 15 minutes to talk about. Thank you. Judge Song.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Thank you for this opportunity. As Ambassador Lee suggests, I understand that the main reason why I am invited to participate is for me to talk mainly about the ICC's role to prevent or stop the North Korean regime from abusing human rights of their own people. Actually, 13 years ago, we almost had such opportunity. Let me tell you in detail. In December 2010, the ICC prosecutor announced that it would soon begin a so-called preliminary examination against the particular actions of the North Korean regime. By the way, the preliminary examination is a terminology of the Rome Statute, meaning roughly deliberation and preparation of investigation. At the press interview on the same day in New York, the ICC prosecutor said that he targeted two incidents. One, a Navy ship sinking that resulted in 46 soldiers. Two, North Korean cannon shelling that resulted in killing two innocent civilians living in Yeonpyeongdo Island. He then expressed his own legal views on these two incidents at the interview. Subsequently, he asked both Korean governments to respond and submit relevant evidence. Of course, no reaction whatsoever from North Korea. It was only South Korean government that dutifully complied with the ICC prosecutors' many requests for years. When the ICC demanded overly sensitive military information, then South Korea refused and stopped cooperation. I found that the preliminary examination that the ICC prosecutor had announced was not well planned from the beginning. There was practically no internal preparation at all on the part of the office of the ICC prosecution. The prosecutor appointed a young female staff with no experience whatsoever as a focal point on the Korean matters. At that time, the officer in charge did not even properly distinguish North Korea from South Korea or vice versa. The staff in charge, of course, was not able to write an inter-office memo or final report. At this juncture, Kim Jong-il died in December 2012, and the prosecutor's term expired. The succeeding prosecutor, who had actually no intention to pursue the North Korean investigation any further, hired a North Korean expert from a state party to write a final report to be submitted to the ICC's Assembly of States Parties. His report was not factually accurate and highly prejudiced South Korean national interests. For example, the report carelessly mentioned that the NLL is a legal national border. The ICC's final report conspicuously lacked in the Korean War history and other background history on the division of the peninsula in the first place. All of these ICC prosecutors' actions ran out of steam and killed the momentum, good momentum, to bring the North Korean leader to justice. I think we lost a good opportunity at this time. Many years, 13 years has gone by. Over time, many South Korean NGOs filed their own complaints against the North Korean Supreme Leader with the ICC. Since the Rome Statute requires only the state to sue, all of these complaints filed by the Korean NGOs were useless and had no legal basis. It is unlikely and impossible that the South Korean government would refer the North Korean situation to the ICC. We would therefore have to figure out on another viable ways to bring the North Korean leader to justice before the ICC. The Security Council referral of the North Korean situation to the ICC would be certainly another possibility. There were two precedent cases. In the past, the Security Council referred the situations of Sudan and Libya to the ICC respectively, although none of them was a state party. If such a referral of North Korean situation would lead to the issuance of arrest warrant against Kim Jong-un by any ICC preliminary chamber, I think that would be a great success. The like-minded group of countries should try very hard to convince two permanent members of the Security Council. Since the arrest warrant issued by the ICC, as you know, has no statute of limitation, the span of Kim's diplomatic and other activities would be restricted considerably until his death, just like Putin's case. This would have a profound impact on the North Korean domestic political situation and hopefully brew to crack the North Korean system over time. The human rights violations that have been taking place in North Korea would, in my view, definitely fall under the crimes against the humanity stipulated in Article 7 of the Rome Statute, as suggested by the COI report. Beyond that, I strongly suspect that a genocide is being committed, as I got hold of some evidence targeting religious groups or a group of people with politically or ideologically bad background, almost all of whom were perished in the political prison camps. All of these actions by the North Korea are blatant violation of every single article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We must therefore continue to double our efforts to get the ICC prosecutor to start its own initiative again, if an opportunity would arise, or create a new and ad hoc criminal tribunal for our purpose based on international agreement. Somebody proposed to amend the Rome Statute to until it would have the universal jurisdiction. This is not, in reality, it's not easy at all, I think. First of all, it's very difficult to amend the Rome Statute, and to secure the universal jurisdiction is another matter that is even more difficult to realize. So, although many people talk about these possibilities, I would be more realistic than they are. At the moment, I understand the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Seoul office, has been collecting, sorting out and analyzing relevant evidence for the future use. In this regard, I was frequently and thoroughly consulted. I understand also that a couple of mechanisms in Geneva, which was subsequently created as an alternative to accountability, would also be helpful in this regard. So we shouldn't give up on this efforts to until the human rights of North Korean people would be restored fully. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Song. Well, despite all difficulties, I'm glad the UN tried to do something to having a more accountability for against the North Korean human rights. And also, I'm glad that you have a constant consultation with OHCHR Seoul office. Actually, our representatives of the James Heenan from OHCHR is here now as well. So in your last remark, you talk about some kind of other UN mechanism in Geneva or created as an alternative accountability. So it would be good if you can elaborate more about that in the Q&A session. And probably James Heenan, you can join us to tell us what UN can and should do for that regard. And we have Larry Diamond here now. Larry?
Good. I apologize that I'm
Okay.
traveling, and I particularly apologize that it is not Korea that I'm traveling to, but these are the constraints of our
Hi.
holidays.
Hi, Larry. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Can I just briefly introduce you
Okay.
before you start? Okay. Okay, here's the Professor Larry Diamond. He's a professor of sociology and political science at Stanford University, and also he's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute of the same university. He's the world top scholar on democratic trends and condition around the world, and also on policy and reforms to defend and advance democracy. Last April, he contributed a great deal for what democracy and human rights, North Korean human rights is related when we have a meeting at Stanford. So hopefully he can talk about those issues in further details today. So Larry, the floor is yours.
Well, yeah, thank you for having me. And most of all, thank you for the work you're doing and for caring so passionately about the plight of the people of North Korea. It is the most repressive country in the world, as you know. No people have suffered graver and more sustained violations of their human rights than the people of North Korea do on an ongoing basis every day. So I appreciate the comments of the previous speaker, and maybe I can begin with documentation and accountability. I think it will be very hard to achieve as long as Kim Jong-un is in power, as long as the regime is in power with the nature of the regime that has been the case from its point of origin. But I think it is extremely important for the future of North Korea and for the well-being of the people in North Korea that we do everything possible to document in great detail the ongoing violations of human rights. And if those can be done before the International Criminal Court, I think they should be done there. If it can be done before the UN Human Rights Council, I think that's an extremely important forum. We have to use every single forum we can and every single means of communication to sustain world attention to and to prevent ongoing and fresh evidence of the regime's nature of rule and its specific violations of human rights and the very grave condition of the people of North Korea. I hope that we can use new technological means to do this, innovative means, including satellite imagery, as was done in a report not too long ago. And I hope that we can lift up the voices of the defectors from North Korea, the people who have managed mercifully to escape and find their way to South Korea and elsewhere. It sounds strange to talk about legitimacy in a situation where you have a regime like North Korea's that depends so brutally and entirely on the use of force and domination and control rather than legitimacy in order to survive. But legitimacy is a very important phenomenon in the international system. And I think it's critically important that we do everything possible on a sustained basis to deny Kim Jong-un and his regime the moral legitimacy to speak and act as really a decent member of the international community. and to make clear that the things that Kim Jong-un and his regime want economically and otherwise have to require a change in the nature of the system and its rule, and in particular, dismantling of the system of repression and the system of camps that hold people in total violation of their human rights. Sometimes we ask ourselves, why do we need to keep documenting? This has all been so extensively, exquisitely, painfully, and horrifically documented already. And the answer is that, unfortunately, the international community has short memories, and young people who we need to influence, and younger people who are in government and civil society and are heavily shaping the international discourse may not know the nature and extent of repression in South Korea and the specific nature of the crimes of this government. So it's an ongoing responsibility that we have. I want to say as well that I think civic education, democratic education, is extremely important. And this may seem like an odd thing to say for a people who have been so completely isolated for, unfortunately, now we're going into the 8th decade of this tragedy. But I think one thing I learned during my few months in Iraq in early 2004 is that you can begin, even in a context of a complete void of understanding of what democracy is, what human rights are, what a rule of law is. You can begin with very simple explanations and depictions based on, I would say, in a way, natural law, an instinctive elementary conception of human decency and fairness, and working off of people's lived experience of the complete absence of accountability, justice, fairness, due process, procedure, to show people what a system of democracy with the rule of law is, to introduce principles of political and legal accountability, to explain why freedom of information and movement are necessary for any kind of decent society and for development. And then to build on those. And so I think we need to think about two things. What would the content of an effort to begin to educate about democracy and human rights, what would that be? And then what is the form in which it might be delivered? And here I can't emphasize strongly enough the importance of technology. We're actually in a world now where there have been enormous technological breakthroughs in communication and information. But in the last 2 decades in particular, unfortunately, the most powerful and intensively utilized breakthroughs have been on the part of repressive governments, of course, most of all the People's Republic of China, in terms of suppression and surveillance and control. We are seeing new means to enable people to get information. And this is I'm going to be honest, this is a very challenging and actually risky endeavor in North Korea, because we know that if anyone is found with alternative sources of information or alternative means of information that are not sanctioned by the state, that it can be a terrible offense. But I'll put this in general terms because there are people that are working on this more specifically. We need to work closely with organizations of people who've managed to flee the North Korean regime and are working for human rights and political change in that country, to think about how we can get information into North Korea, and how we can get tools for receiving and reading that information that would have decent prospects of evading the systems of censorship and surveillance. I want to say one last thing about diplomacy and the balance of power in the world. We know that the Kim Jong-un regime is a regime of intimidation and aggression, not only internally against its own society, but externally in its diplomatic campaign of relentless threats and intimidation, and in its buildup of nuclear weapons. And we have to make clear to the Kim Jong-un regime that this is not going to succeed in the way he thinks it will, to buy him space for internal repression and the ability to intimidate South Korea, Japan, the United States, and so on. And this means that we have to continue to pay attention to deterrence and military strength as a vital dimension of how we engage North Korea. We need to be clear that it's a defensive measure that we are not seeking to provoke, and we're certainly not seeking military conflict, but that we aren't going to be intimidated, and we aren't going to be silenced in terms of the grave political issues here. I'd also like to add in closing, I think there are at least some people who travel around outside the country, see the rest of the world, who've served in and are serving in diplomatic missions, who know full well how bankrupt and morally and practically hopeless this regime is. We know that the regime puts a great deal of emphasis on structuring the lives of these people so that it's extremely difficult for them and risky for them and horrific for their families if they defect. But we need to continue to operate in a manner that is mindful of this vulnerability and that seeks to convey the possibility for a much better, more vibrant future, more decent future for North Korea, one in which it could be on the path to being as a successful country as South Korea has become if it had a different form of government. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry Diamond. Well, I cannot agree with you more to saying accountability is difficult, if not impossible, as long as Kim Jong-un's in power. For that, you talk about documentation is important and education is important. For that, you're talking about what context, content, and also what form. And there you also highlighting for the importance of the technology. And I would appreciate you talk about the important role of the defectors, North Korean escapees, who can also deliver some message to us. And also and in your last remark, you talk about we shouldn't be tolerate with the North Korea Kim Jong-un's military provocation, which can be the closely also related to the human rights abuses, particularly because they launched the 2 missiles overnight today, so that those things are appreciated. But in your Q&A session, I would like to ask you, the Seoul will be hosting Democracy Summit next March. And the President Yoon was talking about the human rights promotion is one of the important agenda. So if you can just tell us what kind of a specific agenda we can talk about democracy and North Korean human rights issues in our summit meeting, I think that will be appreciated. Next panelist is the Honorable Ambassador Colin Crooks. He's the British Ambassador to Republic of Korea since 2022, but he also have a very interesting career. That is, he was also the ambassador to DPRK North Korea from December 2018 until his embassy had to be evacuated as a result of the COVID-19 in May 2020. And you said that your country was the last Western country who left North Korea. Okay, you can explain to me. So I will just give you a floor, but I would appreciate if you can also provide your reflection and suggestion as the ambassador regarding human rights issue in North Korea. And also, what's your opinion for how democratization in North Korea, if it's ever possible, might be achieved, if possible ever? So you have a floor for 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lee, Judge Song, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be invited to speak on this panel and a privilege to be able to contribute to this vital conversation. The human rights issue in North Korea continues to be urgent. We have many decades of highly disturbing reports of human rights abuses in North Korea. The weight of evidence is overwhelming, including the evidence 10 years ago collected by the UN Commission of Inquiry. And yet these issues go unaddressed, unresolved, and unrelieved year after year, partly because of a lack of consensus in the international community, sadly, around these issues. So I would like at the outset to pay tribute to others here and elsewhere who do so much to keep the North Korean human rights issue on the international agenda. I'm talking here about activists, diplomats, practitioners, jurists, and of course those who have themselves experienced the situation inside North Korea and lived to come out and tell the tale and share their stories with us. All of these efforts can help to build a consensus, beginning with a consensus in the democratic world, but we need to spread that consensus beyond the democratic world as well. It's very important that we are able to give a voice to the voiceless and not be silent about the issues that we see. Very important also, as others have said, to document the abuses where the evidence exists. And I'd like in particular to praise the efforts of the Republic of Korea's Ministry of Unification for raising these issues up the agenda, and indeed Ambassador Lee for your role as the Human Rights Ambassador of the Republic of Korea in alerting the international community to these issues. As you said, Ambassador Lee, my own role, I'm currently the British ambassador to the Republic of Korea, but I'm, I believe, the only serving diplomat, and certainly the only one here in Seoul, who has also served as ambassador in both Koreas, who served in North Korea as ambassador as well. I arrived in Pyongyang just over 5 years ago, December 2018, as the British ambassador. That was a time when there was a lot of optimism around about North Korea's position vis-à-vis the rest of the international community. We just had the Singapore summit. The US president had met Kim Jong-un in Singapore. It was a few months after President Moon Jae-in's visit to Pyongyang. There was an awful lot of optimism in the air, and those hopes were dashed at Hanoi shortly after I had arrived in Pyongyang. The Hanoi summit in February 2019, when Pyongyang missed a golden opportunity to emerge from isolation and poverty. I was there in Pyongyang through the rest of 2019 as there were some last attempts to salvage something from the process of dialogue. And then I was there going into 2020 when COVID descended on the world and North Korea retreated back into isolation. My embassy was forced to close temporarily in May 2020. We're not the last Western embassy to depart. A few others remained, but all subsequently left in the months after that. I am, however, still the last British national to set foot in North Korea. And sadly, over 3.5 years later, that remains the situation. The British embassy, other Western embassies remain closed. But for the UK embassy, it is certainly our intention to return, to reopen our embassy and to re-establish a Western diplomatic presence, hopefully with other Western countries as well, back in North Korea as soon as conditions allow. The United Kingdom's position, our policy on North Korea has been clear and consistent. We believe that denuclearization is the key to a prosperous future for North Korea. And we continue to welcome any re-engagement by the DPRK authorities in a process of international dialogue. Meanwhile, in partnership with other like-minded countries, we are doing all we can to incentivize engagement while not shying away from confronting North Korea and calling out North Korea when it breaches international law, both in the security sphere but also in the sphere of human rights. Some of the key elements of the UK's role, of course, our role as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. We believe that when United Nations Security Council resolutions are breached, they should be called out. We have issued national statements alongside our partners every time North Korea has breached Security Council resolutions through missile tests. We believe the UN Security Council should do more, and we need all Security Council members to fulfill their responsibilities in this regard. It is particularly regrettable that one permanent member of the Security Council both condones and celebrates North Korea's breaches of Security Council resolutions and gives succor to these egregious breaches of international law. We believe this should not be happening, and we very much welcome the Republic of Korea joining us on the Security Council next month and look forward to working with the Republic of Korea over the next 2 years on the Security Council. I think that the Republic of Korea has a unique role in sharing information, in helping the rest of the international community to understand the seriousness of the situation on the peninsula. For the UK, we also have a role elsewhere in the UN, in the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council. Specifically on human rights, we have consistently supported resolutions on the North Korean human rights issue and consistently worked with other like-minded democratic countries on these issues. We will continue to do so. Here on the peninsula, the UK is a proud member of the United Nations Command, which has upheld the Korean War armistice for the last 70 years. And in that capacity, we also have been active alongside our partners and allies in enforcing and upholding Security Council resolutions here on the peninsula. And finally, the UK, through our bilateral relationship with the DPRK, has sought to keep channels open, to establish dialogue, but also at the same time not being deterred from giving clear and consistent messages and taking actions where we see these as necessary. For example, the so-called Magnitsky-style human rights sanctions, which we, together with some of our, I think all of our European partners also enforced in response to human rights abuses. On human rights specifically, we do attempt to keep this high on the agenda of our policy towards North Korea. And I'd like briefly to highlight the role that I, as a diplomat, that my embassy, that other like-minded embassies in North Korea can play once we return to North Korea. And I see four main roles for diplomats and indeed humanitarian workers in North Korea. One is something that we as the British Embassy carried out over 20 years of our presence in North Korea, which is to implement humanitarian projects. These are on a very small scale, but we would, through NGOs and through the UN, support and fund small-scale humanitarian projects, often addressing marginalized communities within North Korea, such as the disabled, such as young women, in areas such as hygiene, water, agriculture. The impact of these projects is, of course, marginal, but nonetheless, through these small projects, we were able to make a small difference to the lives of individuals and small communities within North Korea. And I've seen for myself, going around the country, the local impact, at least, that these projects can have. And where we can make a difference to the lives of individuals, I think that we should be doing all we can to do so. The second role that embassies within North Korea can fulfill is simply to counter the narrative of the regime with ordinary North Koreans. That doesn't mean going around necessarily handing out leaflets or making speeches. And I know that there are many in South Korea and elsewhere who have attempted through floating balloons across the DMZ or broadcasting to individual North Koreans to have this sort of difference. The UK also, through our BBC World Service, has been attempting to broadcast an alternative narrative into North Korea. But the very presence of diplomats, of humanitarian workers, of foreigners inside North Korea is in itself an affront to the prevailing narrative of the regime that the outside world is hostile, and where foreigners are in North Korea giving support to communities through humanitarian assistance, giving alternative views where it's possible for us to engage with the ordinary North Koreans. I think that we should be doing that as well. We should bear in mind we can put some faith in technology, but most North Koreans are not online. They are not connected to the internet. The North Korean regime, unlike the Chinese government, is not, in my view, using technology on a wide scale to support oppression. They're able to do that through much more analog means, and it's quite difficult, I think, to reach into North Korea digitally. Hence, I think, the importance of getting people, getting foreigners back into the country. A third role that diplomats and foreigners present in North Korea can fulfill is to confront the North Korean authorities directly through conversation. In fact, we're basically the only people who can, and I've done so many times in every conversation I ever had with the North Korean Foreign Ministry. I would always make sure that I raised the missile issue, the nuclear issue, and the human rights issue. One consistent message that I gave was to admit the UN Special Rapporteur into North Korea, and was able to have not very deep conversations, but conversations nonetheless, which forced North Korean interlocutors to defend their country's position. We've also in the past worked with North Korean officials, taken them outside North Korea, trained them in human rights, again, forcing them to think about issues which perhaps in their education inside North Korea they would never have had to think about. And a final role that foreign embassies can fulfill within North Korea is to gather information to see for ourselves the situation on the ground, a role that we performed alongside our colleagues in the Swedish embassy, the German embassy, and others. The UK's role as the only Five Eyes presence inside North Korea was perhaps unique, when there's no US embassy, no Canadians, no Australians, no New Zealanders, no South Koreans, and no Japanese. We found that in traveling to other capitals, there was a lot of interest in what the British embassy could see within North Korea. I'm not suggesting that we had access to every corner of the country, but nonetheless, we were able to provide some ground truth, to know what North Korean cities, what the North Korean countryside looks and feels like, and to get a sense to some extent of what North Koreans are saying, even if our access to what they are thinking is very limited. Now, none of these actions individually or even together are solving the problem of human rights in North Korea, but I believe that we are doing some small good by performing these functions inside the country. Hence our focus right now on getting our embassy back into North Korea. My successor and his team are ready to return. I believe other countries are in a similar situation. It's very unfortunate that the COVID shutdown, the lockdown, has also led to a wider exclusion of the foreign community from North Korea. We look forward to restoring that presence as soon as possible. And we believe that returning foreigners into North Korea can play a crucial role in helping to build the solidarity and consensus that we all seek on these important issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Crooks. Well, I'm glad you talk about the British principle toward the North Korean policies. Denuclearization is the key, while re-engagement with the North Korean officers is important. And then you talk about the like-minded countries' cooperation on that. And then, but you still said you won't be afraid or shy away to address the problem of North Korean human rights issues. Well, you emphasizing the importance of the return to North Korea and reopen the embassy, a foreign embassy, will be a kind of stepping stone to revitalizing or reinforcing the North Korea's re-engagement with the international community. While I do agree with it, in our Q&A session, I would like to ask you that there is a saying that Kim Jong-un and his government is not at all interested in receiving the foreign ambassadors or the international organization back to Pyongyang. They are only making a gesture for that because they would like to send their laborers to overseas. So in negotiation process, there has to be reciprocal. That's why they reluctantly just receive the foreigners in that process. If so, maybe the UK or other nationals trying to go back to the Pyongyang can give a more leverage to Kim Jong-un to negotiate that might further deteriorate the human rights, the conditions, because if you want to go back there, probably you won't be able to be that much strong to talk about the human rights issue, but only talking about humanitarian assistance. Well, for the devil's advocate, I'm asking you, so I would appreciate if you can talk about your views later on. Last but not least, we have a German ambassador, but before I introduce him, I think we will have some time to entertain questions from the floor. So if you can prepare for your questions, either you raise your hands and then ask me question after the Ambassador Schmidt's remark, or you can just give me some written memos if you would like to address some questions to any panelist. So our last panelist, but not last panelist, the Georg Schmidt. Ambassador Schmidt is the German ambassador to Republic of Korea. He just started his term last October, so he's brand new, right? In one of your recent newspaper interview I just read on North Korea's human rights issue, I was pretty impressed. You made a reference to the history of Germany and as once a divided nation and the Holocaust, and you highlighting the importance of collecting information to raise accountability. And you also mentioned the Western German at that time tried to document what was happening in East German, even if we could not really use the documents immediately. And you talk about effort should continue to raise the problem of and condemn the abuse at all multinational fora available. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting this on the time of the anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I think it's important just for a moment to say it's universal. And although I'm new to Korea, I'm not new to this part of the world. And in many of other countries, there has been a discussion saying that, oh, well, these are human rights, they come from the West, they are not universal. And I think it's very important to counter that whenever this is happening. No, it's universal. And also, if you look back into the drafting procedure, you have, for instance, a very important Chinese intellectual who was part of it, Zhang Peitun. There were Lebanese intellectuals and Indian intellectuals. So if you look back to the time when these principles were written, it was not just Americans or Europeans or who did that. And I think the declaration is important as it used to be, because if I see that ongoing human rights violations, we are talking about North Korea, but in my time as diplomat, I was also Africa director. So you can see then what happens if civil war breaks out, and the level of brutality within countries that's not limited to Africa. It can happen in Europe, it can happen everywhere. And also recently we see much more human rights violations in the course of interstate wars that we thought would be a thing of the past, but they're coming back. If I look at the situation in DPRK, and I think my esteemed British colleague already talked about it in much greater detail than I could do, but it is frightening to see the combination of like COVID and the isolation and what it has done to it, the closing of the border, the repression. I think there's no doubt in this room about the very repressive nature of the North Korean regime, and I think it's also as important as ever to highlight them, as you said. I would like to talk a little bit about the German experience that you mentioned also when you kindly introduced me. And of course, the whole drafting of the declaration was linked very much with the immediate history, what happened before, the Holocaust and the Shoah. And people sat together and said, what can we do to prevent this from happening? So there's always this dimension when I speak as a German to say this is why Germany has a very strong feeling about it. Look at our constitution and you will find the effects of a night when it was drafted in 1948/1949 of the years 33 to 45, very deeply ingrained in that constitution. And there's the second level of the experience of dealing with separation of a division of the country, which has a very different history from Korea's division. And fortunately, we never had a civil war between East and West Germany. Fortunately, we were never threatened with the use of nuclear weapons. And fortunately, we could maintain and build up a level of contact, people-to-people contact, which I think is far above what Korea, the two Koreas have been done. But yeah, nevertheless, we had a very clear border that came up right after the division, and that was finally closed, the last loophole in 1961, with the Berlin Wall being set up, with orders to shoot anyone who wanted to leave East Germany. So basically, it was a big prison for the people in East Germany. And the first few days after the construction of that wall, border guards actually shot and killed people in order to make their point. You are not going to get out of this. So how did the West react to that? We had to accept that reality. We didn't go to war and try to find any violent solution, but we had at the same time to do anything to alleviate the suffering in all the small steps we can do. And we could have a long discussion about Ostpolitik and its successes and failures. But, and as you said, we immediately set up also centers to document the human rights violations. So that was the West Berlin Mayor Willy Brandt at that time. There was an agency founded right on the border between the two Germanys on the western side, in a small town of Salzgitter, to actually document these human rights violations. And there was a central registry of state judicial administrations, and we tried to collect as many information as we could obtain on what happened, how it happened, political persecution, torture, maltreatment. And I can tell you that this Salzgitter was very much a thorn in the side of the East German authorities. Erich Honecker kept going on there, these demands of Gera, and one of them was actually to stop Salzgitter. Now you can ask the question, why bother? He was, in his rule, it was not one part, but the party basically ruled the country with a more or less iron fist. But why bother so much? And it's, I think, that bothering that kept us also going to say, look, if it bothers them so much, there must be something about it. You don't want to have these things documented. You don't want to have somebody who says, look, but this and this happened. And it acted like a constant reminder of the human rights violations until its closure in 1992. And I think it's a very important point that no human rights violation should go unseen. The material actually became evidence in post-unification trials that dealt with nearly 1,000 people killed while trying to cross the border and in the German border. And what we also did from the West German point of view, we continued to highlight the human rights situation of East Germany globally in different United Nations fora after we could actually enter the United Nations. So on the one hand, there was a policy of being very clear and very firm about these are human rights violations. We document them, we speak about them bilaterally, but also on a global scale. But we managed to also remain very pragmatic at the same time. So and I think that's very important, despite all the ideological differences between our government and the government in East Berlin, we never saw the people living in East Germany as our enemies. But we saw that they were the first victims of the system that they were forced into. And I think for us, it's when I look back, I'm also a child of the Cold War. These were my formative years when I grew up in West Germany. And there was a lot of political tension, sometimes more, sometimes less. But you could really see that while also visiting my relatives in the East, how much the government in the East needed to have the West as its enemy, to keep them going, to say, it's a bit what you just said also, like the whole world is hostile, everybody is against you, we need to be guarded, we need to be in a constant fighting mode, we are like under siege. And it was good to then come back to West Germany and to say, look, we don't need that. We're putting a clear stand on, like, against aggression, against threats, but we don't need to threaten anyone. It's not our raison d'etre to sort of enforce a Spartan way of living on our citizens. And that was a very, very strong point in the discussions when we could have the discussions. Between 1961 and 1989, thousands of East Germans actually made these border crossings. Many risks, at great risks, many were risking their lives. And I think it's important that they also then kept their connection with the East. Many of them sent back goods and they supported their families. So people in East Germany more or less knew that their material life was much worse than the life in West Germany. And also when we had direct visits, we would also bring things. People would ask for, oh, can you bring us some good coffee? Can you bring us this? Can you give that? So the whole fiction of like a socialist system which delivers better prosperity, it wasn't there. So there was neither more prosperity nor more freedom. And that undermined internal legitimacy of the government. And I think that played a big role in the desire of like, oh, we would like to have that as well. And we gave East Germans who came to West Germany also an important voice in West German debates. They were very prominent. People like Wolf Biermann, who was actually his citizenship, he was stripped of his citizenship in East Germany. And he was an important voice in West German debates. And it was not easy for East Germans when they arrived in West Germany also. It was a shock, and there were all different kinds of issues. But I think we hopefully we try to do everything to say, look, you're a part of the system here, acknowledge the differences in biography, their problems, but to give them a voice and to keep the issue alive also of division. And I would like to basically finish my remarks also with honoring the people in this country who actually, the NGOs and others who actually keep this alive, to keep the issue alive, and to look after the people who actually made it with great sacrifice into South Korea. I was ambassador to Thailand before I came here, and many of them actually come via Laos, many come via Myanmar, and end up in Thailand. And then that's the way to actually come out. And so we from time to time, these stories came out also in Thailand. And I think we should very closely listen to people who actually come and make the way from the north, salute their courage. I think they're very important voices in the South, but also globally, to strip away legitimacy globally. And countries do care about legitimacy. I completely agree with them. They want to be on the right side. They have their own. I mean, I just read that North Korea now published its own human rights report. So countries want to have that. And I think every person from North Korea who comes in this country and can show that it's possible to build up a new life, it's possible to be successful in this society, despite all the differences, despite all the problems that are associated with that I think these news, when they filter back, that gives people also back in North Korea the hope that I would think is very, very important to keep the spirit going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Schmidt. I would like to tell you that the jazz guitar you mentioned is a very good example for both South Korean government and South Korean NGO to launch North Korean human rights, the human rights record office and other efforts. And also you talk about the border crossing from the east to west, and those things are impossible in the case of Korean Peninsula because of those landmines between south and north. You know, what you said for no human right violation should be unseen. I think that is have a very impactful impact for me. What kind of, since we are talking about democracy and North Korean human rights here as well in this session, what kind of a democratization or at least efforts to democratization in East Germany by West Germany and the international community help the Eastern German people to think about freedom and liberty or human rights? So in your Q&A session, if you can briefly touch upon that issue, I would appreciate it. Can I open the floor, since I don't have any written questions, can I just ask? Yes. Because of the light, I can't see people well here. So please direct your question in short to which panelist you are referring to.
네, 안녕하세요.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your presentations. I'm from De facto Women's Association. I have a question to Ambassador Schmidt from Germany. In your presentation, Ambassador, you talked about a lot of things related to defectors, especially defector women in China, forceful repatriation of North Korean women from China to North Korea. So between North Korea and also German unification, the forced repatriation of North Korean women from China to North Korea. What kind of measures or response do you think South Korean government should have? Second is the perspective of a defector is slightly different. Victim-centered approach has been introduced earlier this year. Victim-centered approach. And when we look at the overall situation in human rights of violation in North Korea, is it about identifying the perpetrator or is it for protecting the victims? That is kind of confusing for the victims.
Any other question? 네.
안녕하십니까. 전 Justice for
I'm Peter Jung from the Justice for Korea. I have a question to Professor Song Sang-hyun. Thank you very much for giving us the background explanations and the history about ICC and the behind story. Thank you very much for sharing that. My question is as follows. Currently, we do have two centers, National North Korea Human Rights Center, and also we have a special NKDB, and also we have Korea Office of OHCHR. So what kind of effort should Korea make? Preliminary investigations or all kinds of activity? We cannot do that. NGO cannot conduct preliminary investigation. Then can Korea, the government, do that? And maybe Korean court, can we resume the preliminary investigation? Can we do that? Because ICC, Korea is the member of the ICC. And what kind of effort can we make from the government level?
More question probably?
My name is Tae. I'm the assemblyman of South Korea, and I myself is North Korean defector. I would like to ask a question to German ambassador. You said that during the division of Germany, East Germany did not treat, West Germany did not treat East German people as their enemy. So in that case, during the Cold War system, what about the political forces' attitude towards so-called East German defectors in West Germany? For instance, in this country, actually, the attitudes are quite different from what kind of political viewpoints you have. Even though I'm a politician, from time to time, I could be criticized or sometimes attacked by the other oppositions as a kind of traitor or garbage from North Korea. So actually, North Korean defectors in this country sometimes are attacked and criticized from a certain political forces as a kind of traitor to North Korean system. So what was the reality in the West Germany before the reunification? I think your country at that time was also divided from left and right. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다, 의원님. Well, then I will just go back to our panelist. Maybe I can only give you for a couple of minutes, so sorry about that.
In view of the limited time, I just would like to say that under the present legal system, you could bring an action against, or a criminal action or a civil action against North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But I think, realistically speaking, this is much ado for nothing.
Thank you. Lady Diamond?
First of all, let me thank the other panelists for their service and their lucid and inspiring remarks. I think South Korea is very fortunate to have such distinguished and eloquent representatives from Europe as the British and German ambassadors that we just heard. Let me, since two questions were in Korean and I didn't get a translation, let me answer the question you posed to me after my remarks and then say one other thing. First of all, thank you to President Yoon for his really passionate commitment on this issue and for being willing to host the next Summit for Democracy and for being willing to have the Republic of Korea stand up for democracy and human rights this way. I think the symbolism of this is very important. And I hope that the next summit that will take place in Seoul will not only address the ongoing needs for our own democracies to perform better, but will also address the plight of peoples living in severely authoritarian regimes, and very specifically, the plight of the people of North Korea and the ongoing moral and political responsibility of free peoples in all our countries and others that will be at the Summit for Democracy to take note of the plight of the North Korean people, to press the government of North Korea for specific changes and reforms that would enable them to live in at least somewhat greater dignity and security, and to listen to and advance in international fora the evidence ongoing of truly appalling human rights violations. I think all of these are obvious priorities and opportunities, and the opportunity of the Summit for Democracy taking place in Seoul next year should not be squandered in terms of advancing the issue of human rights in North Korea. I think that, to be quite candid here, some of the initiatives that need to be taken to find technological means, innovative technological means of trying to get independent and democratic news, information, and ideas. I think the element of broadcasting that Ambassador Crooks articulated is extremely important whenever we can find any means of conveying radio broadcasting on what's really happening in the world into the people of North Korea. We need to keep doing that. But there's some other opportunities for conveying information that I think we need to talk about and are best discussed in different forums than the public forum we have here. Finally, I want to say to the Assemblyman who spoke very eloquently in the question a moment ago, how much I appreciate his intervention and his service and his courage. I began to become aware of the problem that he raised in his question really quite some time ago, 25 years ago, when escapees were first beginning to appear in Seoul and organize and speak out in a critical mass. And this was one of the issues that they spoke about, was the discrimination they felt and the lack of support from some quarters of society in South Korea. This is both a moral issue, the need to honor their courage and their voice and respect it and support them in practical ways. But it's also a practical political one. They are going to be some of the most important sources of influence and change in North Korea and in helping us understand on an ongoing basis how to interpret what's happening there. And they are the most effective voices in giving the lie to the propaganda of the North Korean regime, because they have not only their analysis, but their lived experience.
Thank you, Larry. Particularly, I appreciate you talk about the importance of the North Korean escapees. They are the source of not only information, but also the courage, because particularly North Korea is now the black box. And also thank you very much to joining us, particularly in your Sunday evening. Now, Ambassador Crooks.
Thank you. None of the questions from the floor were directed at me, but perhaps I'll address your question, Ambassador Lee. It's entirely possible, I think likely, that there are elements of the North Korean authorities which do not want to see Western embassies and humanitarian workers return to North Korea. But I don't see any link with the question of North Korean labor overseas, which I think is being dealt with by quite a different part of the North Korean state. Our own position on labor overseas is very clear. It is forbidden by UN Security Council resolutions, and states which host North Korean labor in that way are obliged under international law to return them to North Korea and not to receive new workers. Our position is very clear on that, and I don't think that our wish to return to North Korea has any impact at all on our ability or our willingness to speak out on issues such as this. Thank you.
Very much. Ambassador Schmidt, you have many questions.
Yes, I have, and let me know how much time I have, so I don't want to keep people from their well-deserved coffee break. I start maybe with a question that you addressed to me, like what should West Germany or what have we taught East Germany? I'm very careful with this because I would not want to see people from one side being teachers to people from the other side. It doesn't. I think the people who took much higher risks in East Germany to protest against the system, they don't need any teaching from us from this side, from West Germany. And I think the courage of people in East Germany who stood up in 1989, when it was not clear whether the government would actually use force or not, is something that should make us all very respectful of the achievements. So there was a very strong desire by many people of whether it's for democracy, whether it's for human rights, whether it's simply for a better life, these things, it's very hard to put them apart. But there was a very strong desire for change, and people risked their lives in order to have that change. So that's something amazing. And I think maybe also what helped in East Germany is that we still had institutions that could step in. For instance, we had the churches with all the difficulties, but they played an important role. And we had in the period, we had the round tables where people actually sat down and said, look, don't make it worse. Keine Gewalt, which was one of the slogans, like don't use force. And I think it's impressive that in those very, very crucial moments that there were enough people, despite all the bitterness and the hate, that said, look, let's do this without violence. Let's get over it peacefully. And I think if that hadn't been the case, then history would have been very different. So I salute that courage and that determination at the moment. Then questions of like forced repatriation. Of course, it's dreadful to see people being sent back into North Korea. Very well known that what could happen to them. I think the South Korean government does speak out, so there's nothing I can advise or counsel the South Korean government to do. But I think what's important is that many other countries also speak out. And we have countries who are far removed and who speak on many issues globally, and countries who criticize, for instance, European governments very fiercely for this and that. And I think it's nice to also reach out, or would be important to reach out to them and say, look, there is this forced repatriation happening there. and please do make it an issue. It's not just an issue between China and North Korea, or China and South Korea. If you're serious about standards, then it's a global issue. I was asked about the approach, like victim-centered approach, identifying perpetrators or victims. I think when I talked about Salzgitter was all about collecting as much information as possible about perpetrators. And that involved also testimonials from people who had first-hand experience. But then that's it. We left it then and separated and then focused on like helping people to reintegrate. But I think integration or a start in the West was much easier because, as I said before, we never had a civil war. We never had a war. We never viewed East Germans as enemies. And for instance, we never used the word defector, which sort of would have sort of implied to me that there is a military system and you need to defect from it. Actually, in German, we used the word Flüchtlinge. These were refugees, and people who helped them were Fluchthelfer, which actually was a very positive term, Fluchthelfer, somebody who helped somebody to escape from what we would see as a prison. So, and the word traitor didn't come up. Yes, we had very heated debates about how to deal with East Germany. That very much so, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s. And there were heated debates about how can you actually talk to this government at the same time that this government perpetrates all these crimes. And we even supported East Germany with, for instance, with credits. We used money to buy people out from prisons. And there was a lot of criticism saying like the money that you're giving the East German government actually stabilizes and helps the regime. And this is not physics, it's not natural science. We will never know how much this money actually helped or how much it helped also to destabilize. So there was a big compromise. And in German we say, if you want to have breakfast with the devil, you better bring a very long spoon.
Thank you very much. Well, I think all our panelists was highlighting the importance of collecting information and also the information inflow into North Korea, and also return of foreign embassies and international organization is very important. And for that, I think internationalizing the North Korean human rights issue are critical to promote and also have accountable for North Korean regime as well. So having said that, I think this is the end of the first session. And thank you for all your contribution, panelists. And then thank you for listening us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Lee, and to all panelists for a stimulating discussion. This brings to the end of the first session, and we are going to have a very short break and reconvene for the second session at 11:10. Thank you. Okay, we are about to begin our event, so please find a seat and make yourself comfortable. Thank you. Okay, now we are ready to move on to the next session. And before we move on, we'll be kicking off the second session with special remarks by Mr. Michael Brock, a witness of former East German political prison. A consecutive translation will be provided as well.
Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, ich bedanke mich erstmal bei den Veranstaltern, bei dem Herrn Minister, dass ich hier eingeladen wurde. Ich freue mich sehr, dass hier heute in Südkorea so eine Konferenz stattfindet. Ich freue mich aus zwei Gründen darüber. Zum Ersten, ich komme aus Deutschland, aus Ostdeutschland, also dem Teil Deutschlands, das eine Diktatur gewesen ist. Natürlich ist die Diktatur in Ostdeutschland nicht mit der Diktatur in Nordkorea zu vergleichen, das weiß ich.
Okay. All right.
Aber ich war 1969, also ich komme aus Ostdeutschland, bin 1968 verhaftet worden und saß dann im Gefängnis, weil ich gegen den Einmarsch der sowjetischen Truppen in die Tschechoslowakei protestiert habe. Und war danach eigentlich so eine Art Paria in dieser Diktatur. Und was uns geholfen hat, war die Kommunikation mit dem freien Deutschland, mit Westdeutschland. Wir haben über Radio und Fernsehen viel über die Kultur, die Wirtschaft und die Politik Westdeutschlands erfahren. Und das hat die Zivilgesellschaft, die kritische Zivilgesellschaft in der Diktatur gestärkt. Und das hat die friedliche Revolution von 1989 befördert. Und ich konnte 1990 nach der Wiedervereinigung durch meine Informationen, die ich vorher bekommen habe, ich wurde zum Bürgermeister gewählt, habe dann nochmal Jura studiert. Also ich habe mich, und so ging es vielen anderen Bürgerrechtlern in der DDR, ich habe mich sofort in der Demokratie zurechtgefunden. Und ich freue mich aus einem zweiten Grund über diese Konferenz. Mein Vorredner, Herr Schmidt, der Botschafter aus Deutschland in der Republik Korea, hat über die Aufzeichnung der Menschenrechtsverletzungen in der DDR, die in der Bundesrepublik in Westdeutschland durchgeführt wurden, gesprochen. Und ich glaube, dass die Regierung der deutschen Diktatur Ostdeutschlands sehr viel Respekt vor diesen Aufzeichnungen, vor dieser Dokumentation von Menschenrechtsverletzungen hatte. Und aus diesen beiden genannten Gründen war die Diktatur in der DDR vielleicht nicht so schlimm, sondern war sie nicht so schlimm, wie sie es in Nordkorea sein wird. Und aus diesen genannten Gründen war die Diktatur in der DDR wahrscheinlich oder höchstwahrscheinlich nicht so schlimm, wie es die Diktatur in Nordkorea ist. Hat auch von dem kurzen Gedächtnis der Menschen für Diktatur und Unrecht gesprochen. Das kurze Gedächtnis der Menschen für Diktatur und Unrecht gesprochen. Die Menschen denken nicht lange an Unrecht. Denkstätte Berlin-Hohenschönhausen, dem ehemaligen zentralen Gefängnis des Ministeriums für Staatssicherheit der DDR. Is a memorial for the Ministry of Safety of the GDR. Einer meiner Vorredner hat über das kurze Gedächtnis der Menschen für Unrecht und Verletzung von Menschenrechten gesprochen.
One of the persons who spoke before me spoke about the short memory of people regarding human rights violations.
Und aus diesem Grunde arbeite ich ehrenamtlich.
That's why I work at the Berlin-Hohenschönhausen Memorial.
Und will versuchen, Schülern und Jugendlichen so viel wie möglich über Diktatur und Verletzung von Menschenrechten zu erzählen und für Demokratie zu werben.
And try to teach especially students and people who learn about the violations of human rights and the value of democracy and freedom in our memorial based on my experience in prison.
Und Dieses Memorial, diese Gedenkstätte hat ja jetzt eine 30-jährige Erfahrung mit der Aufarbeitung von Menschenrechtsverletzungen.
The memorial has over 30 years experience regarding the culture of remembrance of human rights violations.
Und wir sind gerne bereit, der Republik Korea diese Erfahrung auch zur Verfügung zu stellen.
And we are happy to cooperate with the Republic of Korea to help building a center for the strengthening of democracy in Korea.
Und jetzt bedanke ich mich ganz herzlich für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Und wie gesagt, es war mir eine Ehre, heute hier zu sprechen.
I thank for your attention, and it was really an honor speaking here today.
Thank you.
All right. I need to apologize for earlier. I was a little bit too nervous and overwhelmed because he was talking at the beginning too much and I couldn't stop him. Okay, and now I will try to make it up and tell you what Mr. Michael Brack said. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you sincerely for the invitation to this conference. My name is Michael Brack and I come from Germany. I was born and raised in East Germany. I was arrested in 1969 because of my protest against the suppression of the Prague Spring. That was the reason why I was an enemy of the state and pariah. I and also others could survive this time thanks to the knowledge about the Western and communication with West Germany. This information and knowledge could be received through the TV and media. We were able to learn about West Germany, the Western politics and perspectives, culture, and freedom of expression. This kind of information made the transition to democracy in 1990 very easy for me. One of the previous speakers spoke about the short memory regarding human rights violations. This is also why I work as a guide for the Berlin-Hohenschönhausen Memorial to teach children, students, the importance of human rights and democracy to convey freedom. The Berlin-Hohenschönhausen Memorial has almost 30 years of experience in teaching about human rights, democracy, and dictatorship. The Berlin-Hohenschönhausen Memorial is pleased to share this knowledge and experience with Korea in order to help set up a documentation center, and I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brock, for your special remarks. Now, the second session will be moderated by the Honorable Lee Jung-hoon. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. We'll now begin our second session, but I will just add that I think what we had was a very important testimony by Mr. Michael Brack, and I'm afraid that particularly in the beginning part, some of the messages might have been lost in the translation. So if the organizers can prepare a transcript of what he's said and distribute it to certainly the panelists and whoever might be participating in this conference, I think that will be a good step forward. In particular, because as mentioned in the excellent first session, South Korea, the Ministry of Unification is in the preparing to build our own memorial. So I believe that what Mr. Brack said, some of the things that is mentioned about the remembrance and so on, can have a very important, provide important ideas as we move forward. By the way, the Unification Ministry, the Committee for United Planning, it's a 통일미래기획위원회. Some of the members have just visited Germany, a few of our members. And in fact, this was precisely the topic that we've discussed and tried to get as much ideas as we could. from the German experience and also learn from Germany the role of these memorials as we move forward in the unification process. That said, we are kind of pressed by time, so I'm going to do a very brief introduction of the 5 panelists. Let me go in the order as written in the program. I will first introduce, to my right is Representative Tae Young-ho, who is a member of the National Assembly since April of 2020. He is, of course, a very well-known diplomat from the DPRK. His last posting was in London before he decided to come to South Korea in 2016. So please give a warm round of applause to Representative Tae. I will do the introductions first. To my left is Ambassador Tamara Mohini, who is the Canadian ambassador to the Republic of Korea. She is also an attorney at law. She's had a very illustrious diplomatic career, having served in many places, including to the UN mission in Geneva and New York, both of them, as well as France, Germany, the Brussels, EU. So all the important international organizations you've been involved in, and that's very important because we need the help of the international organizations to deal with really daunting issue that North Korean human rights is. To his left is Professor Nishino Junya, who is the professor of political science from the Keio University, the Faculty of Law. He is also the director of the Center for Contemporary Korean Studies, and he's probably the most well-known today in Japan as a Korea hand, Korea specialist. So if you turn on news or what have you, then you're most likely to see him when it comes to Korean matters, both North and the South. And then very patiently waiting online are two panelists who couldn't make it here physically, but who are connected online. Let me first introduce Julie Turner, who is the recently appointed U.S. Special Envoy on North Korean human rights. She's had a 16-year tenure at the Bureau of East Asia and Pacific Affairs, Director of the Office of East Asia and the Pacific in the Bureau of the Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. And we've all waited so long for her appointment, and we're so glad that you're finally on board to do your work on North Korean human rights. So thank you. And finally, my good friend Roberta Cohen. It would have been good to have you here, but she currently holds the position of co-chair emeritus of one of the most active civic organizations in Washington, D.C., HRNK, Committee for Human Rights, U.S. Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. She's been with the State Department since the Carter administration, which is hard to believe. And also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Security and Economic Assistance. And also you've been with the Brookings Institute as a senior fellow, and one of the most well-spoken, vast range of knowledge on North Korean human rights and human rights in general. So we're so glad to have you both, Roberta and Ambassador Turner. I know it's getting a little bit late in the East Coast of the U.S., so I'm actually going to turn to you to give about I'll give about 5 minutes to each of the panelists, and then hopefully we'll have some discussions, back and forth, free discussions, and then I will give the floor about 10 minutes or so to ask questions or make some comments. So let me turn to you, Ambassador Turner. Just, go through what you've been up to in the since assuming this position as the special envoy, and our panel is actually focused mostly on the plight or the human rights of those North Korean defectors overseas. So maybe with a bit of a focus on that, you can give us some information as to what you've been up to and what you look forward to in 2024.
Thank you, Lee Jong-hoon, for the introduction. Sorry, I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. I don't know whether you guys are.
We can hear you just fine. Yeah, no problem.
Great. Well, thank you again for the kind introduction, and to the Ministry of Unification for inviting me to participate in today's panel. I know that some of the earlier discussion has focused on the significance of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights within the context of North Korean human rights in the international community. And I think from there, I just want to note, as we mark this anniversary, and as new energy has been injected into the North Korean human rights conversation with the appointment of Lee Shin-hwa as the ROK ambassador for North Korean human rights, your successor, of course, as well as my own appointment into this position, that we can focus on coming together as an international community to capitalize on this tremendous opportunity that we have to push for concrete change to help advance the dignity and rights of the people in the DPRK. As you mentioned, I know this panel is intended to focus on North Korean defectors overseas. And so one area in particular that I am focused on, and that I believe all of us have an opportunity to push for change in, is our shared efforts to promote human rights of North Korean escapees, asylum seekers, refugees, and defectors. I know we all share grave concerns about the recent credible reports that the PRC has repatriated large numbers of North Koreans, including asylum seekers, back to the DPRK, where many are subjected to torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment and punishment, and imprisonment without respect for fair trial guarantees. In some cases, they may be subjected to enforced disappearance or even unjust executions. This is particularly concerning because these repatriations are occurring despite the PRC being a party to the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, as well as the 1951 Convention on Refugees and its 1967 protocol. The PRC alleges there's no evidence of torture in the DPRK, yet the evidence of systematic human rights violations in the DPRK is quite clear. Many of us have read the 400-page 2014 Commission of Inquiry report, where the evidence of this torture and abuse is clearly documented based on countless witness testimonies, and it cannot be ignored. While we were all shocked by the reports in October of the large-scale repatriations, I really urge us to focus our efforts on what we can do next to prevent future refoulements and to advocate for protections of those who have been returned. First, we should continue to urge all member states to abide by the principle of non-refoulement. Second, we should continue to urge the PRC to grant the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees access to those remaining in detention. No one should be returned to a country where they would face torture or persecution. Third, we should call upon the DPRK to account for the whereabouts of those who have been forcibly returned and to demonstrate that they have been treated humanely. Fourth, we should also seek to promote accountability for those responsible for human rights abuses, including acts of transnational repression, which is how we would characterize much of the DPRK's efforts to encourage other governments to facilitate the forcible repatriation of North Koreans overseas. While tackling these lines of effort, we should also remember the very real impact that the PRC and DPRK's policies have on people. And in this regard, I'm thinking specifically about how these policies have led to the separation of many families. In my first few months in my position, but many of you know that I've been working in this field for many years, I've had the opportunity to meet with many refugees and escapees, and many of them had to leave North Korea either in advance of loved ones or maybe followed loved ones. And in that process, their separation became permanent, unfortunately, either because somebody was captured and sent back or someone was trafficked. I can think of countless interactions that I've had with individuals. One young adult who was separated from his sister while crossing the Tumen River and was not able to reunite with her, and now constantly wonders where she is and whether she's doing okay. I have met another North Korean who was an overseas worker and left while serving overseas. And he is constantly wondering about his mother back home and how she's doing and whether or not she's still okay, despite his decision to defect. And then there is another category of individuals who are separated by these policies, and that is mothers from their children. And I'm thinking particularly of North Korean women who may have been trafficked, may have been forced into marriages in China, or may have established lives in China while seeking a pathway to a safe third country. And those women may have had children while in China. And because of the PRC's policies, they may have recently, as with this last group in October, been separated from their children and forcibly returned. And so I hope that we can all remember these stories and consider that not only are these individuals suffering from the trauma of trying to escape to freedom, but there is also this layer of separation and guilt that exists from perhaps being able to arrive in a third country safely. In addition to all of that, I urge for us to also think about the trauma that comes from finding yourself in a new environment. I've had the opportunity to meet with many North Korean refugees as they've arrived in the United States. And I had my first experience recently meeting someone after I had stepped into this new position. And the woman, as she came off the plane, was quite alarmed to see me on the other end because the North Korean propaganda had been very much focused on calling me the wicked woman. And so remembering that many of these individuals, once they arrive in a third country, are also not only learning about living in a free and open society, but are learning those things in an environment where they may be surrounded by people that they were raised to believe are the enemies. And so to the extent that we can rally as an international community to think of ways that we can help advance better resources for these individuals to help escapees access the education system, the employment system. In some instances, it's legal counsel in order to adjust their status, whether it be in the US or if they're a North Korean mother that arrives in South Korea to be able to bring their child from China along as well. And so thinking through those different aspects of what it's like for a North Korean to start fresh, but also remembering that this is a population who can be a living example of what a free and open North Korea could achieve. And so I very much hope that we can also look for ways to amplify their stories and to help to share their successes and to help build their success as they establish new lives in third countries.
Okay, Julie. So
sorry,
I think
enough,
that's all right. Yeah, we can certainly come back to some of the points that that you raised. As you know, for 4 years that I was ambassador for human rights, I worked very closely with your predecessor, Bob King, very closely, and I think it was excellent that we were able to create institutional synergy during those 4 years. So I hope that you will be able to continue and even further that sort of an institutional cooperation with my successor, Ambassador Ishina. So let me now turn to Roberta Cohen. Can you just give a brief introductory remarks, and then we can come back to some of the points?
Well, good evening from Washington, D.C. I want to make sure, can you hear me?
We can hear you and see you fine. No problem.
Okay. Well, first, I just want to say that it's an honor to be here. And whenever I hear Julie Turner and also Shinhua Lee and yourself, Jung-hin, and Tae-Young Ho, I feel that progress is going to be made. It's encouraging. I'd like to address opportunities at the United Nations for promoting protection for North Korean defectors together with challenges. But first, I'd like to call attention to the recent film Beyond Utopia. As most of you know, it shows the harrowing journey of a family escaping North Korea and also describes the brutal punishment meted out to North Koreans who are forcibly returned. I strongly recommend that every government co-sponsoring the UN General Assembly resolution on human rights in North Korea organize or participate in a showing of this film, followed by a discussion of the precarious plight of North Korean defectors and what the UN might do. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and his staff, and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and his staff should be urged, if not instructed, to see this film and organize consultations around it. The UN Secretary General since 2020 has been recommending in his annual report on North Korean human rights to the General Assembly that the international community take steps to protect North Koreans who cross borders without permission and to not forcibly repatriate them. He knows the issue well because he served in earlier years as UN High Commissioner for Refugees and was directly involved in advocating for the non-refoulement of North Koreans threatened with forced returns from China, Laos, and other countries in clear violation of refugee and human rights law. Today, as we know, China exercises considerable political and economic clout at the UN and has been assertively defending North Korean positions, joined by Russia and some states from the global south. Recently, China's UN mission in Geneva sent a memorandum to the UN arguing that there's no current evidence of so-called massive human rights violations in the DPRK or of torture against repatriated North Koreans. Consequently, non-refoulement does not apply to North Koreans who are illegal migrants. However, China's complicity with North Korea in forcibly repatriating North Koreans to situations of danger is outlined in great detail in the 2014 UN Commission of Inquiry report, whose chair, Michael Kirby, even warned China that it could be found to be aiding and abetting North Korea's crimes against humanity in future trials. Now, the 10th anniversary of the COI report will come up next year. It would be timely for the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to prepare a report on the right to leave, documenting the increased restrictions on North Koreans, the abusive treatment of those returned, and the UN has many testimonies, and the punishments being meted out to families of those who defect. The DPRK's urging of other states to forcibly return its citizens, its reported abductions of North Koreans who have managed to get across the border, as well as persons helping them, should be covered as well. And so too the findings of the UN treaty bodies on torture, women and children, which have spoken out against China's forced repatriations. The information collected should become part of the Secretary General's annual report to the General Assembly. Clearly, the Secretary General needs to use his authority on the occasion of the 10th anniversary to speak with states like Vietnam and Laos under pressure to repatriate North Koreans, and to consider, and maybe this sounds a little dreamy, bringing together a group of states to dialogue with China, especially now that the PRC aspires to become an influential actor in the refugee humanitarian arena. UN offices and agencies, in fact, should be developing a unified strategy to implement the Secretary General's call for protection of North Koreans seeking refuge abroad. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees should be an integral part of this effort. UNHCR is the main advocate for non-refoulement at the UN and has offices around the world that have reportedly in the past helped North Koreans in China, Russia, and Southeast Asia. More recently, however, UNHCR has reportedly not been advocating for the rights of North Koreans in China. Its focus instead has been on encouraging China to invest funds from its Belt and Road Initiative in countries hosting large refugee populations. However worthy this goal, it should not be carried out at the expense of advocating for North Koreans. UNHCR's fear of expulsion from China has also been put forward as a reason for its inaction, but this is hardly persuasive if one considers why UNHCR was established and the fact that it often carries out its work privately and diplomatically. Those governments sponsoring the annual General Assembly resolution on North Korean human rights have a major role to play. In 2024, they should seek to convene a Security Council meeting on human rights at which states, can highlight the COI report and also call for a moratorium on forced repatriations. The same states can strengthen the General Assembly resolution by sharpening its recommendations on refugees. For example, it can cite the report of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the DPRK, which directly calls on member states, in particular China and Russia, to uphold the principle of refoulement. It would be important as well for the Special Rapporteur or the Office of the High Commissioner to undertake an update of the last 10 years since the COI report, covering the restrictions and decrees introduced since 2014 that obstruct North Koreans from leaving their country. In addition, at the 2024 Universal Periodic Review of North Korea's human rights record, questions should be asked and recommendations put forward on the right to leave a country. Leaving may be the only way North Koreans have to escape political oppression, chronic hunger, and persecution. North Korea should also be asked to provide information about the whereabouts of those returned and their families. This year, the Special Rapporteur mobilized a group of UN experts dealing with torture, disappearances, arbitrary detention, women and migrants to approach the government of China on the issue of forced repatriations, and a back and forth correspondence has ensued. In future, the UN Special Rapporteur on Internally Displaced Persons should be brought into the picture as well. The forced expulsion or internal displacement of defectors' family members from their homes in North Korea has been gaining attention, and it should. The State Department's human rights reports in 2022 for the first time highlighted this issue. And of course, side events at the UN organized by governments and NGOs and featuring defectors should continue. North Korea's name-calling of defectors and their information should be strongly countered. One, of course, could debate whether these or other strategies can produce results and whether China and Russia's increased backing is making North Korea more impervious to pressure. But there are opportunities, and overlooking human rights concerns will certainly not lead to change. North Koreans have been standing up and risking their lives to escape their country. The international community should do far more to support them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Roberta. Hang on, we'll get back. Okay. Now let me turn to Ambassador Mohini. And I remember when your prime minister visited Seoul earlier this year, just before the G7 in Hiroshima, there were some discussions about Canada and South Korea cooperating to create a quite a massive fund like the NED for example, that could lead to providing support to the civic organization irrespective of the government changes. This was, I think, very important because, depending on which government is in, particularly in South Korea, our perspective on North Korean human rights just changes 180 degrees. That didn't work out. I hope it will eventually, spearheaded by the two governments, but your overall assessment and maybe even on that particular aspect as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be able to have this conversation, and it's an honor to share the stage with such a distinguished panelist, and kudos to our colleagues in North America coping with the time difference. So yes, I think we were really pleased with this new effort in the Canadian-Korean relationship that came through in the summit between President Yoon and Prime Minister Trudeau in May, was this shared agreement that the two countries should really do what they can to give profile to support human rights in North Korea. And I think this was building on our shared understanding that one of the things that really drives the relationship between our two countries is our shared values and our active engagement in many different UN fora. And as you mentioned, before I was in Korea, I was on assignment at our mission to the UN in Geneva for 4 years. And so this was very much my daily bread. But the Canadian mission in Geneva is right next door to the mission of the ROK, and they work very, very closely together in a number of areas, but including on human rights. So we saw this statement in the declaration that followed on the meeting of our two leaders as really putting down an important marker. It's not saying anything new, but I think the focus is new. And we're very much hoping that that will set a trend, that it gives us something to build on, including in our engagement. And I can speak to that also. And then we were very pleased also to see that a similar focus emerged in the trilateral discussions later in the summer. I think it's very helpful that statements such as those give emphasis. So for Canada's part, obviously we've focused always in our foreign policy on the centrality of human rights, the inalienable universal quality of human rights. And in that perspective, we've also very much focused on the right to seek asylum and the imperative to respect the human rights of refugees and migrants. And I think you made a reference to the fact that many of us share a background in law. I think the international legal frameworks, laws and legal frameworks are just so important to this area. And this is very much what Canada focuses on in its efforts to protect human rights of refugees in general, both at home and abroad. And I think it's especially relevant, having watched the UNHCR wrestle with international crisis of displaced persons, migrants. It is also important to focus on refugees, which have a very specific definition, but especially as this is so particularly relevant to North Korea. So as many of you know, Canada has a long-standing engagement in supporting refugees. A refugee resettlement program builds on a long humanitarian tradition, commitment to international law grounded in the 1951 Refugee Convention and Canada's Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. So we're very, very proud that Canada in 2022, just last year, received the largest number of resettlement arrivals. So it was a high year for us, and we were the second highest resettlement country for UNHCR assisted departures between 2019 and 2022. So I highlight these figures just to emphasize our national commitment to assist those in need of protection and resettlement. Not to go into the details of our domestic legislation, but we have both government assistance programs, and also the option for private sponsorship, and sometimes a combination of the two. But I think this is built on a recognition that refugees face a particular set of circumstances. Not all refugees are the same. And so we've also tried to adapt special immigration measures, establish dedicated pathways for refugees from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, but also focusing on women and girls, LGBTQI+ refugees, ethnic religious minorities, journalists, and human rights defenders. So I emphasize that also because there really is such the importance of highlighting gender in the North Korean refugee situation, the tragic incidents of gender-based violence, and that this is a very specific aspect of the group of North Korean refugees. Just to emphasize also that this is part of a global and overarching approach. It doesn't just involve our mission to the UN in Geneva, but also here our embassy is very active in working closely with SKPs and defectors, refugees here, and working with the civil society, community, NGOs, other stakeholders, to try and build support, understanding, and support integration. And we're hoping that can be part of this coming together around this issue, and really support this community and make sure that the specific issues are given emphasis and focus. And I think also there's a good, strong network of other embassies here in Seoul as well that we've been able to work closely with. And so we see some positive movement there. And coming back to the statement of our leaders, that really gives us extra cover. It gives us extra impetus to ensure that certainly the Canadian Embassy in Seoul is a safe space for people to bear witness, help us collect data that leads to accountability. And I think, as Roberta Cohen mentioned, it's important, even when the situation seems dire, to continue making sure we collect data, that we bear witness, that we have the information to hand, because it may come useful in legal contexts going down the road. So maybe I'll just stop there in the interest of time, and look forward to the other contributions.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Ambassador Mohini. I think Canada is a very, very important partner for the ROK as we move forward, particularly on this issue. I will now turn to Representative Tae Young-ho. So maybe, I think our time is really running out. So about 3-4 minutes. Some introductory remarks will be appreciated.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ambassador Lee Jong-hoon and Lee Sin-im-ha, for inviting, some foreign ambassadors, and especially, I would like to appreciate my thanks to the Professor Nishino Zunya from Japan. This is my 7th year in South Korea. I defected from North Korea in 2016. But in the past 7 years, I never personally witnessed this kind of international seminar, which directly addressed the North Korean defectors' safety in foreign countries. All those international seminars I attended in the past 7 years were either peace on Korean Peninsula or security issues. So that means that, what I want to tell is that this kind of process of directly addressing North Korean human rights or protection of North Korean refugees is very fragile. We can, this kind of process can be broken in the coming, the years by the change of the government. So I think, to me, it is a very precious opportunity to address what we should do. Those, presenters before me briefed about the human rights violation situations in North Korea or in China. So now I would like to use my time to directly addressing what kind of actions we should take in a very short span of our time of addressing these North Korean refugees. I would like to touch upon 3 points. First of all, I think the UN institutions, the role of UN institutions must be enhanced, especially the role of UNHCR Refugee Agency and International Red Cross must be enhanced. UNHCR Refugee Agency must officially demand that the countries that are still participating in forced repatriation, such as China, Russia, Mongolia, Vietnam, and Cambodia, should recognize North Korean defectors as refugees and stop forcefully repatriating them to North Korea. Unfortunately, I have never heard of the UN Refugee Agency in China requesting access to and refugee screening of local North Korean defectors. According to rumors, UNHCR in China claims that North Korean defectors do not qualify as formal refugees because they have nationality in North Korea and South Korea. So according to UN Refugee Convention, UNHCR in China cannot regard them official refugees. But, however, COI report argues that they should be treated at least as field refugees. So we want to urge the UNHCR Refugee Agency, what is its policy on this COI report agency's arguments on a refugee surplus. Next, International Red Cross in China should demand access to detention facilities on Chinese border with North Korea, where North Korean defectors are said to be detained. Only when these international organizations continue to raise the issue of forced repatriation of North Korean defectors to Chinese authorities in various ways, then China will also take any small measures to ease this pressure. Next, I believe that approach to issue of forcible repatriation of North Korean defectors within UN nation system needs to be revised. Next year is the 10th anniversary of the release of COI report. We should try to demand UN to re-establish UN Commission of Inquiry into North Korean human rights and submit a new version of COI report on North Korean human rights. Next, the Third Committee of United Nations General Assembly must specify China, Russia, etc., that are participating in forced repatriation to North Korea in the resolution on human rights in North Korea. Currently, UN General Assembly is not demanding specific countries in the issue of forced repatriation in the name of constructive engagement. Now, we must turn from constructive engagement to critical engagement with North Korea and China. When UN adopts a resolution on North Korea, we must return from consensus principle to voting competition principle. At last, since Professor Junya is here, in order to promote discussions on North Korean human rights issues in the framework of Korea, US, Japan, Camp David process, Japanese government should establish a new special envoy position on North Korean human rights so that three countries of Japan, America, and South Korea ambassadors on North Korean human rights could meet on regular basis to address these issues. I visited Japan last week for 3 days, and I continued to address the establishment of Japanese special envoy position on North Korean human rights to Japanese politicians, Japanese civil society, and all the Japanese I met. But the response I received was silent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Assemblyman. Thank you for that. I would certainly like to come back and pick up on a couple of action plans that you've suggested. But Professor Nishino's been patient, so let me now turn to you. I know Japan still has officially 12 abducted citizens in North Korea, which continues to be a major source of friction between the two countries. So that plus your overall assessment of the people in China, North Korean defectors in China.
Thank you, Professor Lee Jong-hun. 예, 일본의 케이오대 니시노라고 합니다. 먼저.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Nishino Junya from Keio University. I would like to thank the Ministry of Unification and Ambassador Lee for inviting me. Allow me to speak in English.
Of human rights of North Korean defectors overseas, I will briefly introduce Japan's effort in dealing with this issue as opening remarks of mine. Japan enacted the support law in 2002, following the return of 5 Japanese abduction victims from North Korea. This law provides financial assistance and various forms of support to the returnees and their families. Since North Korean leader Kim Jong-il admitted to abducting Japanese nationals when he met with former Japanese Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi in Pyongyang in 2002, the abduction issue has remained a paramount concern for the Japanese people. The Japanese government has officially recognized 17 individuals, including 5 who returned, as victims of abductions by North Korean authorities. However, it has taken the stance that there are numerous other cases where individuals may have been abducted. While aiming for the normalization of diplomatic relations with North Korea based on the Japan DPRK Pyongyang Declaration signed by Koizumi and Kim Jong-il in 2002, the Japanese government maintains a position of seeking the swift return of all abduction victims, thorough investigation into the truth behind the abductions, and the extradition of those responsible for the abductions. So in 2005, the Japanese government established the headquarters for the abduction issue, and the Prime Minister serves as the head of this organization. Also in 2006, Japan enacted the so-called North Korean Human Rights Act, shifting attention not only to abduction victims, but also to other cases of human rights violation by North Korean authorities and the protection of human rights of North Korean defectors. So Article 6, Paragraph 2 of the North Korean Human Rights Act of Japan states that the Japanese government shall make effort to implement measures for the protection and support of defectors. The North Korean Human Rights Act aims to deepen public awareness of human rights violation by North Korean authorities, collaborate with the international community to uncover the reality of this violation, and to deter human rights abuses by North Korean authorities. So in 2013, when the United Nations Commission of Inquiry, COI, has established, the government and civic organization in Japan actively supported COI activities. So frankly speaking, however, the abduction of Japanese attention of the Japanese public is primarily focused on the abduction issue. And therefore, more efforts are needed to galvanize public opinion against the issue related to North Korean defectors and human rights abuses by North Korean authorities. So strengthening international cooperation in these issues will foster understanding of the importance of the protection of human rights of North Korean defectors. The Japanese government has so far disclosed very little information on North Korean defectors in Japan, such as the number of defectors entering Japan. Potentially contributing to the limited attention of the Japanese public in the protection of defectors' human rights. So while understanding the needs for privacy protection and ensuring the safety of their families and supporters, I think some innovative measures for publicizing relevant information may be required to deepen public understanding of these issues. So given the appointment of Ambassador Lin Shilfa and Special Envoy Julie Tana, actually already as Representative Tae Yong-ho mentioned, I also think that it may be worth considering the appointment of a Japanese Special Envoy for North Korean human rights issue. So currently, the Chief Cabinet Secretary also serves as the minister in charge of the abduction issue of Japan. But considering the busy schedule of the Chief Cabinet Secretary, appointing the dedicated official for North Korean human rights issue could enhance coordination with the United States, South Korea, and the international community. The Camp David Summit in August present the opportune moment to advance collaboration on human rights, North Korean human rights issue. So lastly, in addressing North Korean human rights and the defectors issue, so significant role has been played by civic organizations like you by fostering greater international collaboration between government and non-governmental organizations. It will be possible to further promote the protection of defectors' human rights. So as Yoon government is making its effort on that, activating framework of cooperation between the government and the private sector could be a small yet meaningful step toward finding a better way in addressing this issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Nishino. I wish we had about 3 hours, which we don't. We have 11 minutes left. I was hoping that we might have some very free back and forth discussions, but I'm afraid we don't have time for that. So I'm just going to make my comment to what you've all suggested, and then give you each about 2 minutes to respond to that. I think the problem at hand, I think it's of course very important to continue to raise awareness and address the problem at hand. But there's a sense that we might be just running around the circle. Not really, we're getting there, but we're not getting over the hump of making a difference. Because from about 80% to go to 90, 100%, it takes a very strong and courageous political will. And I'm not so sure if the states at hand, including my own government, South Korea's government, is displaying that irreversible political will to solve this problem. Are we not doing that because we don't think this is really as serious as we say it is? Is it diplomatically unsavvy to do so? And that's why I will just raise, I think it would take really three things. Number one, and this is something that Ambassador Schmidt earlier talked about in the first session, the information, the importance of not only getting the information to North Korea, but I think the information to come out of North Korea is also very, very important. I mean, when we think about the Holocaust, the images of Holocaust, I think one of the lasting images that's etched in our head is hundreds and thousands of Jewish people being rounded up to board the train to be taken to Auschwitz or Treblinka, right? Where do we have that image? If we had something similar in terms of, we're talking about 600 North Koreans who were forcibly repatriated to North Korea, they say. If we had some images of them being, hundreds of them being forced into a train or bus or whatever it may have been, and being, forcibly repatriated to North Korea, I think that will be a game changer. We don't have that. So I think the information, whether it's the usage of the low Earth satellites, so that there will be an improvement in the communications, so that the North Koreans will be more aware of what's going on outside the world. It's also getting the information out. Number two is accountability. And when it comes to accountability, it's prosecutory mechanism, which Justice Song has so eloquently discussed in the first session. But it's not just about universal jurisdiction, because as you all know that the Constitution of South Korea, Article 3, very clearly states that our jurisprudence runs over the entire Korean peninsula, right? So we know that even if we proceeded with these sort of prosecutory mechanism in the South, this is not going to lead to an arrest of those perpetrators. But I think just the act of doing that, I mean, Spain is doing that with Pinochet or Bin Laden, or why not us? And thirdly, I think the responsibility to protect, and that's where the UN and the international community comes in. And this is something that National Assemblyman Tae has also mentioned. UNHCR is not doing its job. Okay, it's as simple as that. And we're talking about it, but are we really doing enough to put the pressure on UNHCR to do its job, to have access to these North Korean defectors? I know that not all 100 of them, all 100% of them may be refugees, but that's for the UNHCR to determine. So let them have access to these defectors. And what is the international community going to do? To have them, the accessibility to these defectors. And not just talk about it, but actually make this work. And that's where I would like the panelists to maybe chip in for 2 minutes each. If you can just be very brief. I'll come back to my Washington friends. Roberta, do you want to give it a go first? You're muted.
Yes. The first point you made about having pictures and having people to see and atrocities to really witness. I mentioned when I spoke the film Beyond Utopia, and I think it comes the closest so far. It's a documentary, but the people are wearing cameras on them so that you can actually see the harrowing escape and what they have to go through. And that's where I felt that at least we have that movie. And if it can be widely shown and can have comments, I've been at showings and I've talked about the film. People are interested, and the movie has some power to it, and I hope it gets awards. And if it gets an Academy Award for documentaries, that would be great for the cause. The satellite imagery, this is something I don't know the technological details of, but I do know that certainly governments have better and more keen satellite imagery, and it's would be a very good idea if the governments with that could share, or possibly with non-governmental groups, about North Korean prison camps and others, because they have sharper imagery than the NGOs who rely on satellite imagery. So I think governments ought to be looking at that and seeing what's stopping them, but also seeing if they could participate and contribute, because I think you're right there. It would certainly focus attention. With regard to UNHCR, I certainly agree with you that they have a role to play that they haven't been playing. But it's not just them. It also has to be a look at the geopolitical situation, and China is the second largest contributor to the UN right now. And it's one of the challenges that has to be dealt with. Their views of this issue, and they have great fear. I mean, given Kirby's telling them you could be held up in trials, they're very much on the defensive here. So it involves dealing with the geopolitical situation that's shifted and is trying to affect the UN, and it is, and also the Secretary General's office. How much reinforcement is given to his playing some kind of role to sort of make this happen? He understands this issue, as I pointed out. The information issue is very strong. But I think it was Tae Young Ho that mentioned that part of what's difficult too, another challenge aside from the geopolitical situation, is that we don't know how long governments are staying in office in the democracies, whether their policies will change. And so it's very hard to get a long-term view that's going to have a lot of impact. And we have to find a way to deal with that. And maybe these institutional arrangements among the institutions formed. I mean, Julie Turner and Shinhwa Lee, and if one were to be appointed in Japan, and it would be nice. Canada also looked at that, whether that kind of institutional arrangement could help keep the issue on the agenda. And finally, I would just say, in addition to that movie I mentioned, if there were a movie star you could interest, I would hope that would also focus the issue. There's a lot of competition these days because of outright wars.
Okay, thank you, Roberta. Thank you for that. Julie?
Yes, I agree with everything that Roberta said, but I also want to add to that. I also very much support the 3 areas of work that you outlined, which include access to information, but also the fact that those channels, those same channels used to push information in can be used to pull information out. The US government for many years has focused very much on supporting groups that are both pushing information in and pulling the information back out. We do also support collaboration with civil society groups on satellite imagery analysis that can be useful in supporting many of the things that both you and Roberta mentioned. As well as the prioritization of accountability efforts. And I think the one thing that I will just add while thinking about the accountability space is very much that I encourage everyone to think about victim-centered accountability, survivor-centered accountability, and how we're undertaking these efforts to make sure that we're also making sure that the voices of refugees, escapees, are factored into what they want to see on the other end of these accountability efforts. With regard to governments and the shifting policies, the good thing about North Korean human rights is, at least in the US, it's a very bipartisan issue, and we have been very committed and continue to be committed to North Korean human rights over the course of the last 70 plus decades. So I will also just say that I don't want us to lose sight of whose responsibility it is to protect the welfare of the North Korean people, and that's the North Korean government's. And so while we're thinking about the efforts that we can undertake to urge UNHCR to undertake work in Beijing, or as we're thinking about things that the rest of the global community can do through the UN. At the end of the day, it's up to the North Korean government to take care of its people, and we should very much maintain that pressure on the government to take responsibility. Governments are supposed to serve the people, not exploit them. And with that, I will pass the baton back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Julie. Representative Tae, final words?
Yes. I want to say something about information out from North Korea, just one thing. Now, the situation in North Korea is quite different what it used to be 10 years ago. Now there are more than 4 million, the cell phones inside North Korea. That means around more than 4 or 5 million North Korean people carry cameras in their pocket every day. That was quite different. So from time to time, actually, they can film or take pictures of human rights violations inside North Korea and secretly smuggle them out. The point is that what kind of incentives, we could provide for those informations out from North Korea, because it would risk their lives if to send these informations out. Recently, one South Korean media released a picture of prosecuting 5 or 4 North Korean young people who sold the rotten, the beef in the markets. They were officially, shot publicly. So I wonder how they got that pictures from North Korea. So I think if the government or NGOs could make some kind of, very inviting incentives, I think, then many people may risk their lives to send very, good pictures or, video files which can actually show the human rights violations situations inside North Korea, which could even alarm and surprise the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Tae. Ambassador Mohini.
Thank you very much. I guess just to focus on this point of sustainability, I think that's something that a lot of us have focused on, and how to ensure that the pressure is maintained, the focus is maintained. And I guess I'd just say to that, legal frameworks outlive governments. And civil society engagement outlives governments. That's what stays. And that's why I think our efforts are certainly focused on reinforcing the multilateral norms, the importance of those rules. And I think also a lot of the rules are there already. We have to really focus on implementing them. And it's also about global implementation, what all of us are doing at home and vis-a-vis other situations. As Roberta referenced, sadly, the situation in the DPRK is not the only issue of dreadful human rights abuses. So it really is about maintaining a global focus and strengthening norms, for example, gender equality, the fight against gender-based violence. If we reinforce that everywhere, it helps focus on specific situations as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador Mohini. And finally, Professor Nishino.
Yes, because time is running out, I want to just say as I already mentioned in my opening remarks, I think the Japanese government and Japanese people should pay more attention not only to the abduction issue, but also to the all of the other cases of human rights violation by North Korean authorities. And lastly, I want to ask South Korean government and the people to exercise the very consistent and continuous leadership in dealing with this issue, even if you have a change of government. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nishino. So, in the beginning, I said I would turn to the audience for some questions, but I'm afraid that we don't have enough time for that. So I'm going to have to wrap this up at this juncture. I am really grateful for the 5 panelists who've joined us in our last sessions, particularly for Roberta and Julie. You're staying up kind of late, so really appreciate it. I hope that 2024, which is just around the corner, is a year of action plans, that we lot of things that we're talking about, but really, as Ambassador just pointed out, putting them into implementation. I really hope that 2024 turns out to be a year that turns things around from raising awareness to actual implementation of action plans. So thank you all, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, by the way, because there were some interruptions, we will have the remarks made by Mr. Michael Bragg to be translated into English or Korean? In English, and it will be read out. Our panel is officially over, so we'll take a seat whilst the translation of the transcript is being read out. Thank you.
Okay, this is the end, and on behalf of the ministry, I deeply appreciate all of you for your participation and look forward to the continued and collective efforts to improve human rights situation in North Korea. Now, to all the participants, the luncheon is ready and it is to be served. Please enjoy. And the luncheon for the special guests and panelists will be served at a different room. Thank you.